We've been telling you Parliament will decide today if the Constitution should be amended to allow for land expropriation without compensation. 3 years ago, the National Assembly adopted a report recommending the Constitution be changed. Today marks the final step, well, one of the final steps in that process. I'm joined now by Dr. Naude Malan, a senior lecturer in development studies at the University of Johannesburg. Doc, thank you for your time. So I've just been grappling with, what has happened really. What has really happened in the last 3 years. And I can't make heads or tails of what has happened. A part of me feels like, the last 3 years have really been a total waste of time in that the numbers just don't stack up. There's no likelihood that this amendment can pass. But another part of me says you can never tell what the EFF will do. What's your sense? Has the last 3 years been a complete waste of our time, which we could have used to advance land reform in a better way than this? Or are we likely to have something seismic happening in as far as the Constitution is concerned?
Hello to Lasizwe and hello to all the viewers. Thank you for this question. In South Africa, we are struggling to find a way to deal with the past. And this was one of the ways we want to, have attempted to do this. But this, the way we do it is obviously not perfect, and there's a lot of questions that we could ask about this. But it does signal that we have to do something about our land, and land reform needs to be placed in proper context. So this is actually a part of a longer process, and I also think we should not underestimate the impact of politics on the way this is panned out. And politics might give us quite a different view of what's going on here.
So if the expropriation, amendment to Section 25 passes, it specifically talks to the issue of land being expropriated for land reform and land restitution.
Yes.
What would be the implications on the ground, for instance, in the agriculture sector?
So there are two sets of implications. The one would be that this would affect our property rights actually quite severely, and especially the farming establishment have opposed this, and we need to listen very carefully what they are saying. They are not necessarily against transformation, and I'm actually surprised by how strong the movement for transformation is amongst established farmers. But this bill will certainly affect us, and it will affect South Africa as an investment destination. Another related issue, which is often forgotten and very easily forgotten, is that these legislations, not just the Constitutional 18th Amendment Bill, but also expropriation bill, will also affect communal tenure and people who live under traditional tenure in the old homeland areas. And it is very, very unclear what will happen to those people. So there's a lot of questions that one could ask around these bills. Not only around the procedural issues around there, because there are two things here. There's the 18th Constitutional Amendment Bill and the Expropriation Bill, and there are some relationships between them. But if the one is not passed, like the 18th Constitutional Amendment Bill, if that is not passed, there are great questions we can ask about the Expropriation Bill, and it will open that bill to litigation, which will also delay any kind of progress that we could make there. So this is a very, very tricky situation, and we need to have a very clear head on how we want to deal with this going forward.
So I'd like us to tackle the two levels of impact that you just raised in the last few seconds. Let's start with the impact that you anticipate in as far as investment is concerned. Why would investment be affected by this? And I ask that question in the context where the bill as it stands, the Constitution Amendment Bill as it stands, it retains much of Section 25, except that it adds a portion that then says, in some instances, the amount of compensation could be determined to be nil. And a further law would then need to be passed to spell out circumstances where the compensation would be nil. But the rest of it is pretty much retained, that there should be compensation and it should be agreed in specific ways or determined by a court. So why would that affect investment in a context where there is certainty still?
You know, we just need to understand investors, and I'm not talking necessarily only about international investors. I'm talking about also South Africans who want to invest. And you know, for any bill or any measure that would affect property rights is always controversial, and we need to really understand that. You know, to do business is a very sensitive issue, and it is merely at that level, often at a very perceptual level, but there is a substantive argument also to be made that if we erode property rights, it becomes very difficult for people to invest. And that is a very clear and straightforward issue that we need to be aware of. So what will happen with these two processes is that the expropriation bill would actually have to kind of operationalize the 18th Amendment Act. If it passes, it becomes an act. And because the Constitution cannot be too detailed in what should be done. The one thing has to be said, though, that it is actually not necessary. There's been a lot of commentary that said the current Constitution is very much adequate in expropriating. So that's the first question. The second question is, if the expropriation bill is passed without the constitutional amendment passed, there will be questions on whether the bill is actually constitutional or the act is constitutional. And that will create a lot of dysfunctions and delays. So what we need to understand is that there are two processes. For the constitutional amendment bill to pass is quite a difficult thing. It's not only 2/3 majority, but it is also National Council of Provinces must also okay this or approve this. So that's a tall order. And from the numbers of political parties on the national parliament, we do not actually expect this to pass. The expropriation bill could pass, but then it would be open to litigation. So these are really complicated things.
Yeah.
And it has to do with how people perceive property rights in South Africa.
The second
other thing that it does, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to ask about the other element of impact that you mentioned around, it affecting land tenure and people who enjoy land tenure on agricultural lands and farms and the likes. Could you spell out how passing an amendment that provides that in certain circumstances that the main path to, driving land reform is where we expropriate, we pay compensation, but there can be instances where the compensation amount is zero. How would that affect land tenure and people who enjoy tenure on agricultural lands and farms?
Yeah, that's a good question, because what it basically means is that someone could lose the whole value of a farm or a farming enterprise. And for us to reach that point in this whole process, it's quite a laborious process, because there's quite a lot of procedural guarantees or there's processes in the bill that have to be followed, and those are quite extensive. And the landowner has, is quite short notice. It's usually 20 days, but they have to respond very quickly to these things. But it's very unclear how those decisions would be made, and these things have to be confirmed by a court. So it's not that it is completely out of the hands and that officials will decide everything. But there are, the timelines are very pressing. They are, stacked quite quickly on top of each other. And the landowner would have to intervene to protect their property rights. However, it seems that it would be possible. But one would have to speculate where exactly that would take place. And it is also clear that this bill doesn't want to expropriate all property. I don't think that is actually what's going on. But it will take place in certain instances, and that could perhaps be, where land was long ago taken by force, where there were historical injustices taking place. But, this is complicated, because the land is worth more than just the land, because the buildings and activities on top of the land have value. So what this bill suggests is that those things, in some circumstances, would be deemed to have a zero value. Yeah. And it's very unclear exactly when would that be the case. But we can expect that something like this would create opportunities for conflict and contention and engagement. And Yeah, we need to ask if is this the real way we want us to change and transform South Africa and our agrarian structure. It might be that there could be other ways that would be more effective.
All right, Dr. Naude Malan, thank you so much for your comprehensive view on these matters, and also rightly pointing out that this may not be the actual final hurdle, because if, and that's a big if this bill makes it past the National Assembly, there's still the National Council of Provinces. So the process is actually not even done at the level of Parliament, way before it even gets to be signed off by the President and becomes an actual amendment of the Constitution.